Okay.
So good morning all. Today's practice parameters is on the topic post-irreversible encephalopathy syndrome. Myself Dr. Surabhi and the moderator is Sapna Madam. So brief introduction. Posterior reversible encephalopathy syndrome or PRES. It is an acute or subacute cerebral syndrome and the main manifestations are headache with encephalopathy, seizures or visual disturbances, and these symptoms can be present in various combinations, and usually there will be a triggering factor, mostly hypertension or pregnancy related conditions like preeclampsia, eclampsia or HELLP syndrome, renal failure, cytotoxic agents and certain autoimmune conditions. And this condition is very important to identify because if we treat them, most patients recover. Coming to the history, it was Dr. Hinji in 1996 had published a series of 15 cases in which she had noticed that there is a reversible syndrome happening in patients who were admitted with these acute illnesses. So when we look at the cases, there were 4 cases of eclampsia and SLE, then hepatorenal syndrome, in which the patient had a hypertensive encephalopathy, and some patients had undergone bone marrow transplantation, and one patient had undergone liver transplantation and mainly hematological malignancies. So in these patients, similar symptoms of headache, vomiting, and visual hallucinations were noted, and the imaging was also showing hyperintensities, mainly suggestive of vasogenic edema in the posterior head region. So she had published this as a reversible posterior leukoencephalopathy syndrome in 1996. So coming to the epidemiology, so it can develop at any age from infancy to elderly, but it is most frequently seen in young or middle-aged adults with a mean age was noted to be 45 years. And incidence of PRES recently published in Lancet 2025 was 2.7 cases per 1 lakh population, and it is twice more common in women than men, and the incidence is high among certain patient population, like 50% in patients with eclampsia, around 25% in patients undergoing bone marrow transplantation, around 6% in patients undergoing solid organ transplantation, and less commonly, that is 0.4 to 0.8% in end-stage renal disease and SLE. So now, before going into the pathophysiology of stress, we should be knowing about the normal cerebral autoregulation. So the cerebral blood flow is maintained when the mean arterial pressure changes from around 50 to 150. The cerebral blood flow is maintained at a constant level. So this is by the normal cerebral auto-regulation which is working. So this is mainly due to four mechanisms. First is the immediate will be the myogenic tone. That is when there is a change in the transmural pressure or the blood pressure. When there is hypertension and the transmural pressure increases, there is reflex vasoconstriction. Similarly, in hypotension, there is reflex vasodilatation. So that happens in seconds, and that is a myogenic tone. And then we have the neurogenic response, in which there is sympathetic and parasympathetic system. Sympathetic cause vasoconstriction and parasympathetic causing vasodilatation. And then when there is a cerebral metabolism, when there is an increase in the cerebral metabolism, the PaCO2 will increase, and that will cause vasodilatation. And then we have the endothelial mechanism, in which the endothelial cells will secrete certain factors like thromboxane A2 and endothelin causing vasoconstriction, and nitric oxide causing vasodilatation. So with the help of these mechanisms, a constant blood flow is maintained to the brain, even if there is a fluctuation in the mean arterial pressure. So, for the pathophysiology of PRES, many theories have been put forward, and the most important theory is the hypertension hyperperfusion theory. That is, we know that the normal blood barrier is formed by the endothelial cells with a tight junction and the astrocyte, and also including the pericyte and the microglia. So, when there is a shoot up of BP above the autoregulatory limit, there is hyperperfusion and there is a breach in the blood-brain barrier causing vasogenic edema. So this mainly occurs in the watershed zones. So that is a hypertension hyperperfusion theory, in which there is either there is severe hypertension or a rapid increase in the blood pressure, which cause a breakthrough and cause endothelial injury and vasogenic edema. So this theory is supported by the high proportion of PRES patients with high blood pressure or fluctuating blood pressure in literature. And also, PRES mainly affects the posterior head regions, because there are less autonomic receptors in the posterior circulation compared to the anterior circulation. So, so the autonomic reflex mechanisms are weak in the posterior circulation, and that is why the vasogenic edema mostly occurs in the posterior head region. Then an alternative theory is a hypoperfusion theory, because it was noted that previously few studies have shown that on imaging there is hypoperfusion, which was noted. So, so in this theory, they say is that initial event was a arterial vasoconstriction or a hypoperfusion, which had triggered a hypertensive crisis, and then it has caused the endothelial injury. So the initial event was a hypoperfusion, but this theory is challenged because most patients with PRES do not have a brain ischemia or infarction, and most patients improve with blood pressure lowering treatments. And the final common pathway in these two mechanisms is endothelial dysfunction. And without this BP fluctuation also, in 20% of the cases, there is no hypertension. So in these conditions, endothelial dysfunction is a main mechanism. So this occurs in inflammation, which is seen in sepsis, preeclampsia, eclampsia conditions, HELLP syndrome, autoimmune conditions, and when we use immunosuppressive or chemotherapeutic or cytotoxic medication, what happens is there is an inflammation which happens, and there is an increase in the cytokines, mainly the TNF alpha and the interleukin 1. So this causes the endothelial cells to secrete adhesion molecules, that is ICAM1 and VCAM1. So these adhesion molecules, they help the leukocytes to adhere into the endothelial cells, and they will secrete the reactive oxygen species and proteases, and then there is an endothelial injury and a breach in the blood-brain barrier. And or this TNF alpha and IL-1, they can also make the astrocyte secrete more of VEGF, which actually weakens the tight junctions in the endothelial cells, thus causing blood-brain barrier breach. So this theory, so it was studied in eclampsia patients that there is a high concentration of autoantibodies which occur against the placenta. So, and then there is inflammation and complement activation and pro-inflammatory cytokines, which is a main mechanism in eclampsia. And this mechanism can explain why the PRES is occurring in the absence of hypertension. So now let's see the main conditions which are associated with the development of PRES. One is a general condition, that is severe hypertension, or when there is a severe BP fluctuation, that is seen in dysautonomia in case of when there is a spinal cord injury, or in case of GBS. And then there is inflammation which is going on. Those conditions are like sepsis, eclampsia, preeclampsia, help in renal failure, and also in electrolyte disturbance like hypercalcemia and hypomagnesemia. And then when the patient has solid malignancies, solid organ malignancies, as well as hematological malignancies. And then if the patient has undergone a solid organ transplantation or a bone marrow transplantation, and also late radiation associated encephalopathy. And in autoimmune conditions, that is around 50% of the breast cases happen in autoimmune conditions. That is mainly SLE, rheumatoid arthritis, Sjogren's scleroderma, and vasculitis, and also autoimmune GI conditions like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, autoimmune hepatitis, and also it has been reported in NMOSD. And then toxin. So mainly the recreational drug usage has been increased, was found to be increasing in the recent times. So more and more press cases have been reported with recreational drug usage like cocaine, amphetamine, which will actually cause a sympathetic response and sudden rise in BP and hypertensive crisis. And also in cannabis, ephedra, organophosphate poisoning, and also different toxic bites like snake bite, scorpion sting, wasp sting. In all these conditions, there is a shoot up of the BP due to the sympathetic response which is happening. And the usage of cytotoxic and immunosuppressive medications, mainly chemotherapeutic agents like adriamycin, vincristine, vinblastine, gemcitabine, platinum-based chemotherapeutic agents, then interferon therapy, capecitabine, 5-fluorouracil, citrabine, and etoposide, and also other immunosuppressive medications. Main important ones are tacrolimus. Many cases have been reported. Cyclosporin, anti-VEGF agent like bevacizumab, then corticosteroids, rarely with rituximab, MMF, methotrexate, and azathioprine. And also, CAR T cell therapy is a new chemotherapy which has been used. That is mainly the T cells are removed from the patient's body through apheresis, and then it is genetically modified, and then it is given back. So that has a property against, it works against a cancerous agent, cancerous cells. So this T cell therapy, CAR T cell therapy has also been reported to be having associated with PRES, and also other medications like IVIG and tyrosine kinase inhibitors. And other hematological conditions are thrombocytopenic purpura, in which there is a widespread endothelial injury causing multiple thrombosis at different sites, and hemolysis, essential thrombocythemia. Then sickle cell disease, during acute vaso-occlusive crisis, which happens in sickle cell disease, and along with severe pain episodes, there can be a sudden fluctuations in BP causing leading to PRES. And sickle cell disease has been associated with recurrent PRES also, and hemolytic uremic syndrome, then malignancies like NHL and acute intermittent porphyria, and COVID-19 and neuroborreliosis also plus has been reported. So coming to the clinical presentation, so it is an acute to subacute neurological symptoms which comes in over hours to several days, and rarely the symptoms may persist for several weeks. And the common presenting symptoms are encephalopathy, which is reported in 30 to 90% of the cases, which can be from mild confusion to coma, and seizures in 60 to 75% of the cases. So seizures can be focal to generalized, and status epilepticus has been reported in around 16% of the cases, and predominantly bi-occipital epileptiform discharges are usually seen in confused or appended patient presenting with PRES. And headache, usually it is diffuse and gradual in onset, occurring in up to 50% of the patients. And headache may be underreported because the patient presents with seizures or encephalopathy. And if the patient is presenting with thunderclap headache, then that mainly may suggest RCVS, which can actually overlap with PRES. Then visual disturbances have been reported in 40% of the cases, that is cortical blindness, hallucinations, reduced visual acuity, and visual field defects. And focal neurological deficits have been reported only in 5 to 15% of the cases, aphasia, hemiparesis, and rarely myelopathy has also been reported with PRES. So now let's see the imaging findings. So purpose of the image is to confirm the diagnosis of breast and to rule out all the alternative diagnosis. So the initial investigations usually done as NCCT, but the sensitivity of NCCT is limited compared to MRI. But so we have to look for the subcortical vasogenic edema, which is seen as a hypodense area in the NCCT, and it is also used to evaluate hemorrhage and hydrocephalus. So coming to MRI, it is an investigation of choice, and especially the FLAIR and the T2 weighted sequences have a high sensitivity to diagnose subcortical vasogenic edema. So the classic MRI findings is the bilateral vasogenic edema involving the posterior parietal and occipital lobes, which is found in many of the case series. Up to two-thirds of the patients had this, and in some case series, up to 90% of the patients have vasogenic edema in the posterior head region. So mainly three patterns have been described. That is, one is a dominant parieto-occipital pattern, second is a hollow hemispheric watershed pattern, and the third is a superior frontal sulcus pattern. So one of these patterns will be seen in around 70% of the breast cases. And why this is occurring is it is in the watershed area between either the ACA-MCA watershed or the MCA-PCA watershed. So this is the first pattern, that is a dominant Pareto-occipital pattern, in which the subcortical vasogenic edema is seen in the occipital and the bilateral occipital and the parietal regions. And this is a hollow hemispheric watershed pattern, that is it will be seen in the ACA-MCA watershed or the MCA-PCA watershed subcortically, and also in the internal watershed areas. And the superior frontal sulcus pattern, where the edema will be mostly in the superior frontal gyrus near the sulcus. Although we say posterior head regions are involved, in around 54 to 88% patients, frontal lobes can be involved. 68% of the patients, temporal lobes can be involved, and also atypical press hyperintensities can be seen. In around half of the patients, thalamus involvement can be seen. In around 1/4 of the patient, brainstem as well as basal ganglia hyperintensities can be seen. And also, in around half of the patient, cerebellar involvement can be seen, although it is considered atypical. And the hyperintensities can be often asymmetrical also, but strictly unilateral press is very rare, but it has been reported in around 3% of the cases. Unilateral press has also been reported. That is mainly after carotid endarterectomy, when there is a reperfusion injury, unilateral press can happen. And less commonly, the hyperintensities can be seen in optic chiasm and spinal cord as well. And since there is a blood-brain barrier breach, there is post-contrast enhancement can be seen in 1/4 of the patients. So this is a atypical cerebellar involvement which is seen, usually bilateral symmetrical hyperintensities with post-contrast enhancement can be seen. And also, this patient is a case who patient had undergone liver transplantation 2 weeks before and was on tacrolimus, who presented with press. So here we can see the edema which is involving the midbrain and the pons extending into the cerebellar peduncle, as well as edema in the posterior head regions. And this patient was also on tacrolimus, who had undergone liver transplantation. Usually in those immunosuppressive agents, atypical features are more seen. So here we can see thalamus involvement as well as the cerebellar involvement. And this is a paper on patients, 8 cases with press presenting with spinal cord involvement. So in these patients, all of these patients presented with hypertensive encephalopathy, and only in 4 of these patients had a myelopathy clinically. And in rest of the 4, but all the patients had hyperintensities, which was mainly starting in the cervicomedullary region and extending to more than 4, it was like an LETM extending more than 4 vertebral segments in the spinal cord. And so the areas can also have contrast enhancement as well as hemorrhage and diffusion restriction. And sometimes before the classical MRI finding, there can be mild sulcal flare hyperintensity with leptomeningeal enhancement. So this case was a case of eclampsia, 35-year-old patient on a postpartum day 10, she presented with eclampsia. So in this patient, the initial MRA on the initial day showed mild sulcal hyperintensities in the posterior head region. And in the contrast, there was mild leptomeningeal enhancement. And then on follow-up, on day 14, the patient had the typical vasogenic edema, as we can see. And also she had a hemorrhage. We have to distinguish this one of the DEDs in press is posterior circulation infarction. So how to differentiate is that in infarction there will be cytotoxic edema because of the cellular swelling. So cytotoxic edema will have a diffusion restriction, that is a hyperintense signal in the diffusion with a decreased signal in the ADC. But in vasogenic edema, it will be hyperintense in both diffusion as well as ADC along with flare hyperintensity. So it will be looking like a T2 shine through. That is how we differentiate the edema. However, in a few cases of press, that is around 11% of the press cases, can also have focal areas of restricted diffusion due to minor ischemia which is happening. So if that is there, then that is the patient will have some residual sequelae due to the cortical laminar necrosis which is there. So this case, patient presented with uncontrolled hypertension with an encephalopathy. So here, along with this, in the diffusion restriction, a focal area of restricted diffusion was also noted. And then 6 weeks later, on the repeat MRA, we can see the cortical laminar necrosis, which is appearing as a flare hyperintensity. Then hemorrhage also is atypical, but it can occur in 5 to 30% of cases. And it is mostly seen in those patients taking anticoagulants or having an intrinsic coagulopathy. And imaging findings in hemorrhage can include mostly SH, sulcal SH, or parenchymal hematoma, that is a focal hematoma. And microhemorrhages are also seen. In around 50% of the cases, microhemorrhages can be seen. And these microhemorrhages will remain unchanged on follow-up also. So this was a case series which in which it was published in European Journal of Neurology in 2024, and they tried to study the systematically. They tried to study the frequency of ischemic stroke and ICH in patients with RCVS and PRESS. So in this study, among the patients of PRESS, around 11.2 patients had stroke and around 16.1 patients had intracranial hemorrhage. And the type of hemorrhage, around 7% had SH and 9.7% had intraparenchymal hematoma. So this was this is an image showing sulcal SH and intraparenchymal hemorrhages, intraparenchymal hemorrhage in patients with PRESS. And then advanced imaging, cerebral angiography mostly done to rule out aneurysm since the patient presents with headache and encephalopathy. So when cerebral angiography was done, it was seen that in PRESS cases, there is a diffuse or a focal vasoconstriction or a vasoconstriction with vasodilatation with a string of bead appearance, which is seen usually in CNS vasculitis or RCVS. And so those patients in the case series was found to have moderate hypertension and around mean arterial pressure of about 130. And this cerebral angiography was mainly performed to rule out aneurysm. And in MRA as well, MRA TOF as well, we can see focal vasoconstriction, vasodilatation, or diffuse vasoconstriction in PRESS cases. Around 15 to 70% of the cases in which they have done angiography was found to have this pattern. And repeat MR angiogram will show a reversal of the vasculopathy over time. And in normotensive press cases, vessel may appear normal and or it can show pruning of the vessels, especially in the posterior cerebral arteries. And occasionally, abnormal IC and vertebral arteries have been noted, resembling fibromuscular disease or dissection in press cases. And MR venography was found to be normal. So, this patient with a history of drug abuse presented with severe sepsis with necrotizing pneumonia and emphysema, and the culture was growing Pseudomonas and Klebsiella, and he developed encephalopathy, and then imaging was done. So we can see the typical hollow watershed pattern, and along with that, DSA was done, which was showing this string of bead appearance mainly in the ACA secondary and tertiary branches, and also in the MR TOF showing similar pattern in the PCA branches, as well as the pica was also showing focal vasoconstriction. And when the perfusion studies were done, it was showing a mixed pattern. Most of the cases showing hyperperfusion, but some of the cases hypoperfusion was also seen. And MR spectroscopy, it was consistent with reduced neuroaxonal function. That was reduction in Na choline ratio and Na creatine ratio. And when SPECT scan was also used, this also showed mixed pattern. So this was a case of press in which 99 SPECT was used, which was showing reduced perfusion in the posterior parietal area. So, what is that? And in the laboratory investigations, we have to check for any features of any endothelial injury, that is in the peripheral smear. We can use for hemolysis and schistocyte formation. Then LDH levels may be raised. Then also thrombocytopenia can be seen. And in those patients with preeclampsia, they were mainly noticed to have a hemo concentration. And renal dysfunction, we have to look for any renal dysfunction, urine for any proteinuria, and electrolyte levels, because hypomagnesemia and hypercalcemia has been associated with PRES. And in HELP syndrome, there is mainly hemolysis with elevated liver enzymes and low platelet. And in infection, we have to look for multi-organ dysfunction, altered coagulation, altered LFT, RFT, and pulmonary function, cardiovascular instability. And for those patients who are receiving chemotherapy, or malignancy patients, or who are immunosuppressed, we have to, presenting with an encephalopathy, we have to do an lumbar puncture to rule out mainly alternative diagnosis. And so usual CSF pattern in PRES is an elevated protein concentration, but with no pleocytosis. So diagnosis is mainly clinical, and along with the radiological, we can diagnose this condition. And there is no universally agreed diagnostic criteria which is there. But the recent article which has come up in Lancet by Jennifer E. Fogat et al. On PRES, they have come with a diagnostic algorithm. So the patient, when the patient present with acute to subacute neurological symptoms, with a risk factor like a chronic renal disease, autoimmune disorder, immunotherapy or chemotherapy, with a precipitating event like a renal failure or eclampsia, sepsis, hypertension or BP fluctuation. And when we proceed with the brain imaging, brain image shows bilateral vasogenic edema, or a typical pattern which is seen with PRES, with no, when we have to rule out all the alternative diagnosis. And also in immunosuppressions, we have to consider LP also to rule out infections. So then we can diagnose it as PRES. And then the management should be to identify the precipitating factor, lower the blood pressure, and consider if the patient is having a prolonged encephalopathy or recurrent seizures, consider EEG. So the main DDs would be infectious encephalitis, autoimmune or paraneoplastic encephalitis, posterior circulation infarctions, malignancies like lymphoma, gliomatosis cerebri and metastatic disease, subcortical leukoariosis and CNS vasculitis, PMLE, and osmotic demyelination, ADAM, toxic encephalopathy, and mitochondrial encephalopathies. So coming to the management, so the most important thing is the treatment of hypertension and removal of any underlying cause which is present. And for those in hypertensive crisis or with marked blood pressure fluctuation, the mainstay of treatment is smooth and sustained reduction of the blood pressure without avoiding all variations. Sudden variations in BP should be avoided. And so the typical goal is to reduce blood pressure by 25% within the first few hours, followed by cautious normalization next 2 to 3 days. And, sudden rapid and excessive blood pressure reduction can worsen the end organ dysfunction, and systolic blood pressure should not be reduced below 130 if the initial reading is exceeding 220 millimeters of mercury. And since there is an increased risk of an acute kidney injury and or in patients with CKD, it can worsen their renal status. So, no blood pressure target as it is not. In case series, it was like 150. And antihypertensive agent selection, there is no evidence to support a preferential use of specific antihypertensive agents, and therapy should be based on the underlying medical condition, comorbidities, and profile, side effect profile. And for pregnant patients can benefit from beta blockers like labetalol, and those patients who have a overlap with RCVS, calcium channel blockers are preferred. And then and management of seizures, so around 60 to 70% of the patients present with seizures, so it should be treated with standard anti-seizure medications. And non-convulsive status epilepticus can occur in around 16% of the patients. So this So previously for these cases, steroids were used, but steroids on later studies have been shown to be harmful, and steroids should be avoided in these cases. In seizures, around 16% of the patients can have a non-convulsive status epilepticus. So this study was published in the Neurocritical Care Journal in 2018 by Bastard et al. So in this study, so they have mainly looked at patients who were admitted critically ill with PRES, and those who have undergone a continuous EEG monitoring. So it was found that around 62 patients of the patient, 62% of the patients had either non-convulsive seizure or periodic discharge, and non-convulsive status epilepticus was found in around 16% of the patients. And it was associated with an MRI finding, that is, if the patient is having a cortical restricted diffusion, then that was associated with more of non-convulsive seizure and periodic discharges. And it was also, if it was there, it was associated with a worse outcome, that is mortality wise, 3 deaths in those patients who had this versus seizure and did not have the discharge. And also on follow-up also they've used a Glasgow outcome scale. So disability was more with those patients who had a no, that they have mentioned the patients who had typical clinical features with seizures. They have like retrospectively looked into all those cases who have undergone a continuous EEG monitoring and the NCS. And when these discharges were present, it was associated with the more disability on follow-up as well. So continuous EEG monitoring should be considered in PRES if the patient had severe fluctuations in mental status and they did not recover after their convulsive seizures. So who had Can request. Then in normotensive patients, focus should be on the withdrawal of triggering medications like immunosuppressants and cytotoxic drugs and provide supportive care. And we can also try to use alternative agents with a low risk of press like sirolimus instead of tacrolimus. And then regarding whether uh, the agent which has caused stress can be reinitiated, that has been a small case series of 17 patients uh, who have undergone chemotherapy, and they have re-challenged the patient with the same drug. In that, none of the patients had developed press again with the same drug. So it can be re-challenged if considered necessary. With vigilant clinical monitoring and blood pressure control, it should be undertaken. So press and eclampsia, so the main culprit is a placenta. So delivery of the baby and placenta should be done in patients presenting with eclampsia, and seizures should be managed with magnesium, and sepsis and TTP, it should be managed as per standard of care. And so typically for anti-edema, typically it is vasogenic edema, which will resolve with the correction of underlying trigger and time. That is usual over several days, the vasogenic edema will reduce. So the anti-edema measures like mannitol, hypertonic saline should be considered in patients who are presenting with fulminant press, and there is a risk of brain herniation, then this can be considered. And surgical management, those patients who have obstructive hydrocephalus may require external ventricular drainage, and severe posterior fossa edema patients have undergone suboccipital decompressive craniectomy, and also decompressive heavy craniectomy and hematoma has also been done in the past with good recovery. So coming to the outcome, so the prognosis of press is generally considered favorable, as majority of the patients will have both clinical and radiographic resolution, which can take over, which can come in few days to a week with almost full recovery. But if it is not treated, life-threatening complications can also occur, like brain herniation, cerebral hemorrhage, status epilepticus. And from previous studies, the clinical factors which are associated with poor outcomes are the presence of an end-stage renal disease, malignancy, heart failure, stroke, and also time to control the causative factor. So in this study, they have tried to look into the clinical characteristics and outcomes of patients admitted to hospital with press. It was a retrospective study, and in the study, the mortality was 2.2%. That is, which was more in females, 2.4 in females and 1.7% in males. And in this, the end-stage renal disease, atrial fibrillation, and malignancies seem to be linked with a very high risk of mortality. Coming to malignant press, so the definition of malignant press is if the patient is comatose with a GCS score of less than 8, and despite the management, he continues to have a clinical decline, and the radiology is also consistent with press. And the main radiographic features of malignant press is a marked cerebellar edema with mass effect, and presence of hydrocephalus and evidence of brainstem compression, intracranial hemorrhage, and severe supratentorial edema. So in this, this patient presented in a comatose state, and we can see severe cerebellar edema with hemorrhage is there, and there is brainstem compression and impending brain herniation, and also hydrocephalus. And also patients with severe supratentorial edema can also develop malignant press. So early diagnosis is very essential, and timely intervention have led to actually a very good outcome also. So this case series, this was published in 2025 by Fugate et al. And so in this, she has listed the 11 cases which were reported in literature, those patients with malignant press who had undergone surgical decompression. So we can see that all these patients had, 4 of these patients had intracranial hemorrhage, and all of them have undergone surgical management, hematoma evacuation, hemicranic craniectomy, and EVD. And we can see that the 1 year outcome is actually good from 0 to 2, MRS 0 to 2, and only one patient had MRS 6. So other patients had improved. So most of these patients recover favorably with adequate management. And this is another. This was another case series of 5 patients who had malignant breast. So two of these cases were patients who had SLE with renal failure, one eclampsia patient, and uh, one patient had drug toxicity, toxicity with methamphetamine. So here also, all the patients have undergone a surgical management, and we can see that the 1 year outcome is 1 to 2, MRS 1 to 2. The recurrence of PRES is actually very rare. In the observational studies, it was reported in 5 to 12% of patients. And the risk factors which were associated with the recurrent PRES is suboptimally controlled hypertension, renal failure, and it was also seen with sickle cell crisis, recurrent PRES. And so effective management of these risk factors reduces the risk of recurrence. So this study had looked into early readmissions after PRES. So here we can see that around 31% of the patients were in around 1,900 patients got readmitted. That is 31% of the patients. They have studied around 1,900 patients, and it was mostly 31% of the total PRES patients. And so the leading etiology for readmission was one was infection, hypertension, and only like 6% of the patient had recurrent PRES. And in study, younger age, higher comorbidities, longer length of hospital stay, and disposition to a place other than home were associated with the risk of readmission. And the radiographic findings were not predictive. And epilepsy after PRES. So the follow-up seizure cases of those patients who had developed epilepsy was 9.5%. And the presence of cytotoxic edema or hippocampal sclerosis on imaging was more common among these patients who had a long-term epilepsy. However, large prospective studies are needed to confirm this association. And anti-seizure medication, so most of the patients had a acute symptomatic seizure and required only short duration of anti-seizure medications up to 1 to 3 months. And only around some patients with the imaging abnormality had required long-term management. In stroke after PRES, so there was an elevated risk of stroke which was seen in PRES patients. And this retrospective study, it was a cohort study. In this study, the incidence of stroke was 6.1 percentage, and it was more of ischemic stroke, 4% ischemic stroke and 2% hemorrhagic stroke. And the potential mechanism they have proposed are persistent endothelial dysfunction, impaired cerebrovascular autoregulation, and disruption of the blood-brain barrier. And also comorbidities which were associated with PRES independently had a risk for stroke as well. So some potential biomarkers were looked into. That is, in SLE patients who were having presented with PRES, it was found that there were higher serum levels of IL-6 and IL-10. And IL-6, as we know, upregulate the endothelial adhesion molecules. And but while animal studies support the involvement of these molecules, they have not been systematically measured in large cohorts of PRES patients. So in future, IL-6 and VEGF will be considered as surrogate markers of disease activity and might be suitable endpoints in future clinical trials. But further studies are clinical studies are required. And so if these markers can differentiate PRES from non-inflammatory mimics like RCVS, and also from presentation of PRES primarily due to hemodynamic triggers such as hypertensive encephalopathy. Coming to PRES and RCVS, so these are two clinico-radiological syndromes which comes under the same spectrum of cerebral vascular dysregulation. In both of them, actually the autoregulation is impaired, and so they both share a common pathophysiology, and it is involved in the same spectrum. And it was seen that press-like vasogenic edema is seen in 10 to 38% of patients with RCVS. And also in press cases, the constriction pattern is similar to RCVS. And press and RCVS most often exist independently and they have different triggering factors. So RCVS mainly presents with recurrent thunderclap headache with focal deficit. However, this press, it is more of a gradual onset headache with visual disturbance, seizures, and confusion, and mainly with vasogenic brain edema. And we know the triggering factors for press. For RCVS, it is mainly sympathomimetic agents which can trigger, but the pregnancy-related conditions are common to both. And treatment strategies also differ between the two conditions. In press, we understand the underlying triggering factor and we try to control the hypertension. In RCVS, it can be a more targeted approach with calcium channel blockers. And in some cases, blood pressure augmentation is done and also endovascular therapy with vasodilators have been tried. Coming to pediatric press, so the incidence of press is around 0.04% in pediatric patient and it is higher in those children with risk factors. So the main risk factors are hematological disorders, kidney disease like HUS, acute glomerular HSV, which is more common in children, and those taking cytotoxic drugs and those who have undergone organ or bone marrow transplantation. And also hypertension is much more common in pediatric patients than adult patients. And because the cerebral blood flow autoregulation threshold is lower in children than adults, the blood pressure at the onset of press is also lower in children. And so mean BP at presentation in pediatric press was found to be 140 85 millimeters of mercury. And most of the around 90% of the pediatric patients present with seizures and usually start focally and it can then subsequently generalize. And second most important presentation is encephalopathy and the radiological patterns are all similar to adults. So to summarize, so press is a acute to subacute neurological syndrome and is mainly due to endothelial dysfunction and it can result from failure of cerebral autoregulation and either severe arterial hypertension or BP fluctuations and due to cytotoxic effects due to sepsis or chemotherapy or immunosuppressive agents. And brain MRI, we have to remember the three important patterns. And however, the absence of edema does not rule out press. And most patients with press, they have a favorable long-term neurological prognosis as we have seen and will have clinical and radiographic resolution over weeks. What has been proposed is that in the posterior circulation, the autonomic regulation is less compared to the anterior circulation. In the anterior circulation, more of sympathetic system will be there, which is one of the mechanisms in cerebral autoregulation. So that is impaired in posterior circulation. That is why posterior circulation is more associated.
And also the patients that you get legal skin, but not beings. There is a certain difference to the legal flow, substitution. And it's the budget in the plastic. And also the synthetic innovation. Innovating some better, more density and system. I think for the theory, you have also made it that the quick message of the painful. Painful city and painful gas. Some kind of the variance related situation. Or the expect a city and
The hypercalcemia is one.
and I will see. Get that. Take your body.
The reported case was that in a malignancy related hypercalcemia, the patient had diffuse endothelial injury. Vascular problem.
The other one we have followed the solution. They were telling that the inflammatory situation like the reversal as the other one is not
CVS.
As you mentioned,
CVS may be more provoked by symptomatic agents.
so we had covered it that the main theme was from the Lancet article, which was quoted, and there is other very good review article, which residents for in practical neurology, just come 2022 also on press and RCVs. Regarding present RCVS authorities or who have worked in this, including single letter, they have mentioned that this is actually a continuum, like whether they are, because they have shared risk factors, shared pathophysiology, but clinical and radiological presentation differ between. So clinically, when you look at breast, they usually present mostly there is encephalopathy and seizures, and headache is seen up to 50% of patients. Whereas RCVS, the hallmark is recurrent underclamping pains. And the other seizures are less common, but they are also observed in RCVS. And imaging, when you look at breast, is usually clinical radiological diagnosis, like the clinical background along with the imaging finding, will be the diagnosis. Whereas in RCVS, imaging can be even normal in the acute. Parenchymal imaging can be even normal. But vascular imaging, even vascular imaging can be normal in the early phase, because spasm can be sometimes in the distal vessels which may not be picked up by the non-invasive imaging like MRI angiogram or CT angiogram. And because of which the symptoms characteristic, you have to repeat an imaging which may show it abdomitis later, and bleeds like subarachnoid, parenchymal bleed are more common in RCVS when compared to breast. And regarding the management, the removal of triggers is a mainstay of management in breast, along with the management of blood pressure. And why it should not be rapidly reduced is because there is a risk for renal injury. If you have a rapid, if you bring out a rapid renal reduction. So the target they have mentioned is 20 to 25% reduction of BP in the first few hours, followed by a gradual reduction to mean artery pressure of 140 to 150. That is within the cerebrovascular muscle, within the next 24 to 48 hours. In RCBS, rather than rapid reduction of BP can result in development of rotational infarct. So we know that we gradually bring down the blood pressure along with maintaining cerebral removal of cerebral vasoconstriction by using cerebroselective vasodilator. Like you have mentioned it, and this including Lancet and the practically of these two articles are very good reference articles which you regarding this, there is no literature regarding the nucleus harm of steroids. So that single one series was there for
Thank you. We are winding up the section.